The United States has been...
You've missed 2 out of 3 of the past ASEAN gatherings, and the former US Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage said this week that the US is so distracted by the war in Iraq that it's totally ignoring Asia to China's great strategic advantage. Has the US taken its eye off the ball in this region?
Oh, the United States has been extremely involved in Asia. We have, I think, one of the strongest relationships with China that any administration has had. It's a complex relationship, but if you look at the work that we're doing together with China, for instance, on the North Korea issue, where the president has brought together the 6 parties to deal with this issue, you see the advantage of just not saying that you have a good relationship with China, but actually putting that relationship to use to make it a safer region. We clearly have strong security and alliance relationships with Japan, South Korea, relations that we have modernized recently with Australia, an increasingly good relationship with New Zealand. The president has been to Australia twice. I've been to Australia 3 times. We've been to China and Japan and South Korea multiple times, and the president was recently in Vietnam, a place that I think history would have said it would have been unusual to see an American president. So no, we have very strong relationships in this region. We have very strong economic relationships, security relationships. We're expanding our cooperation with organizations like APEC and ASEAN. I think the administration has put a lot of time and energy into Asia, and it's paying off.
The Petraeus report goes to Congress next week. Regardless of what the report says, the American public seems to be losing its will for the war. Your allies seem to be losing their will for the war. Congress seems to be losing will. Given that, how much longer can this war go on, regardless of what the Petraeus report may say?
Well, I see it a little differently. I think that the American people want to know that we can succeed. And of course, it's been a difficult course in Iraq. It's been harder than I think any of us would have thought, because Saddam Hussein really destroyed the fabric of that society, and trying to build on the ruins of a tyranny is very, very difficult. But it's very clear that the president's policy announced in January of surging American forces to help the Iraqis provide population security is having an effect. It's having an effect on civilian security in places like Baghdad. It's having an effect on giving the Sunni population of Anbar province, where the president and I were just there with our forces and with Iraqi leaders, of giving those people the confidence to take their streets back from al-Qaeda. I can tell you that one of the most remarkable things that I've seen recently was to sit at a table with local Sunni sheikhs, local leaders, who have literally sent their sons, tens of thousands of them, to fight al-Qaeda and to take their streets back, and they've done it in cooperation with us. And so yes, the going's tough, but the security situation is improving. The politics is changing in Iraq, principally at the local level, but even at the national level. And I think that when General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker come back, they will be able to say that yes, things are changing, and the president is committed to Iraq, because Iraq is critical to our security, critical to those of us who need to fight in the war on terror. And that's not just the United States, but places like Australia too. And in that regard, let me just say that the contribution of Australia to the search for liberty in places like Iraq and in Afghanistan is greatly appreciated, the sacrifice, but also the tremendous valor of the servicemen and women of the Australian Defence Forces.
The President made it clear in his remarks this morning that he's passionately committed to seeing Iraq through, as you've just made clear in your remarks. Even though you've just arrived, you'd be aware that the opinion polls are showing that John Howard is lagging very much behind Kevin Rudd, with an election looming. Given the very firm statements that the US leaders have made about the importance of Iraq, isn't the obvious assumption that the US would be very disappointed if Kevin Rudd was to withdraw Australian troops?
Look, Australia is a democracy, and Australia will make its choices about its leaders. There isn't any secret that Prime Minister Howard and President Bush have had an extraordinarily close relationship, because they share values. They represent, I think, the courage and the valor to take on the difficult work. Prime Minister Howard was in the United States when September 11th happened, and as a result, they've had the kind of relationship that you build in the trenches. It is a relationship that has allowed Australia and the United States to do difficult work together. And it's one thing to talk about Iraq, and obviously whatever is done in Iraq should be based, in terms of troops, should be based on conditions on the ground. It should be based on what is necessary to win the fight in Iraq, to defeat al-Qaeda, to defeat extremism in Iraq, so that that extremism takes a blow and can't continue to spread in the way that we saw at September 11th or that we saw in the Bali bombing. That's the question, is what does it take to actually do the job? And I think that's the question that I would hope any Prime Minister of Australia or of any country in the coalition would ask.
And is that the message that the President will be giving Kevin Rudd in their meeting tomorrow morning?
Well, I'm quite certain that when they speak, the President will want to reflect his own views, but also to hear the views of Mr. Rudd. But again, we're in a struggle. The terrorists have made their choice. They've shown that choice. They've shown it in bombing and murdering innocent people for their own ideological purposes. And we've made a choice, the United States and Australia, which is to fight back. These are not people with whom one can compromise. These are not people with whom one can negotiate. They take advantage of the innocent. They prey on the weak. When you have an enemy that preys on the weak and takes the lives of innocents, you have but one choice, and that is to fight. And the question of how we fight and at what levels we fight ought to be one of how we're going to win this historic battle.
Speaking of which, in this war on terror, which was meant to reduce terrorism around the world, figures compiled by your own State Department every year since 2001 show that the incidence of terrorist attacks is actually on the increase. Even just going back to 2004, there were 3,000 attacks, 2005, 11,000, 2006, 14,000. Don't these results indicate that broadly the policies you're pursuing in the war on terror are failing?
I think what this shows is that we're actually pursuing them for the first time, and they're fighting back. We were sitting innocently on a day in September, a beautiful Tuesday morning. Innocent Australians were sitting in a tourist spot in Bali. Innocent Brits were sitting in London at a railway station, and they were attacked. And so now we're fighting back. And so yes, the terrorists are fighting back too.
It must be alarming that it's trending in the wrong direction.
No, what would have been alarming is if we had allowed this to remain under the surface, if we had not taken on these networks, if we'd not taken on people who, yes, will use an attack to kill innocents. But if the alternative is to simply withdraw from the playing field, that isn't going to work. And the fact is that we're not just fighting them militarily. We are fighting them for the hearts and minds of the people as well. As I mentioned, I was just in Anbar. We've won the hearts and minds of people in Anbar because they've seen the ugly face of al-Qaeda. They know what al-Qaeda means. If you think al-Qaeda won't fight back, they will. But these are people who are now experiencing economic reconstruction and development, who are asking for schools for their children. The United States has spent $14 billion on reconstruction in Afghanistan. And if you look at what we've done in places where human need has manifested itself, the work that Australia and the United States did together in the tsunami, that won a lot of hearts and minds in Indonesia, one of the largest Muslim populations in the world. If you look at the work that we have done together in the earthquake in Pakistan, that is winning the hearts and minds of Muslim populations. So no, it's not just a military issue. It is about providing hope and opportunity. And just as Australia has been a very good ally on the military side, Australia has been a very good ally also on winning hearts and minds.
But so far, despite those efforts, it's not translating into results. We're seeing the opposite effect. We're seeing more terrorist attacks, not less. When will we see less?
We are in the middle now, maybe even at the beginning, of a generational struggle against this ideology of hatred that is so virulent that people send their children in suicide vests to blow up other children. Now, something is wrong in that circumstance. What must we do? We must defeat those who are irreconcilable, the Al-Qaedas, those fighters.